The private jet touched down at the exclusive airfield just outside the city at exactly 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon that would change everything. Marcus Chin stepped onto the tarmac, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the concrete as he breathed in the familiar air of home. After 18 months of voluntary exile in Switzerland, dealing with a scandal that had nearly destroyed his tech empire, he was finally back. The 42-year-old billionaire adjusted his charcoal gray suit and ran a hand through his perfectly styled black hair. His assistant, Rebecca, had been sending him daily reports about his company's recovery, but nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to discover. The scandal involving leaked customer data had cost him billions and forced him to step down temporarily as CEO while the investigations cleared his name. Now, with all charges dropped and his reputation slowly rebuilding, he was ready to reclaim his life. Marcus climbed into the back of his black Mercedes, nodding to his longtime driver, James, who had been with the family for over 15 years. The man's weathered face showed genuine happiness at seeing his employer return, but there was something else in his eyes, a nervous energy that Marcus couldn't quite place. "Good to have you back, sir," James said, starting the engine. "Mrs. Chun will be surprised to see you." That was the plan. Marcus had deliberately kept his return secret, wanting to surprise Elena after their long separation. He had spent the past month planning this moment, imagining her face when he walked through the doors of their mansion. They had spoken regularly over video calls, but he knew it wasn't the same as being together. The distance had been hard on both of them, and he was eager to rebuild their relationship. As the car wound through the familiar streets of the upscale neighborhood where they lived, Marcus gazed out at the manicured lawns and impressive homes of his wealthy neighbors. Everything looked exactly the same, yet something felt different. Perhaps it was his perspective after spending so much time away, or maybe it was the weight of everything he had lost and fought to regain. The mansion came into view, its modern architecture and floor-to-ceiling windows gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. Marcus had designed the house himself when he first became successful, wanting something that reflected his journey from a poor immigrant's son to one of the country's youngest billionaires. The 20,000-square-foot home sat on 5 acres of perfectly landscaped grounds, complete with a tennis court, swimming pool, and guest house where his mother had lived until her death 3 years ago. James pulled into the circular driveway, parking in front of the main entrance. Marcus noticed Elena's red Tesla in the garage, along with what appeared to be a silver BMW he didn't recognize. Probably a rental car for one of her friends, he thought, or perhaps she had bought something new while he was away. Elena had always been independent with money, even after their marriage, and he encouraged her business ventures and personal purchases. "Should I wait, sir?" James asked, but Marcus shook his head. "No, take the rest of the day off. I want to spend time with Elena, and we'll probably order dinner in tonight." Marcus grabbed his single piece of luggage. He had left most of his belongings in storage in Switzerland, and walked toward the front door. He still had his key, of course, and had specifically asked Elena not to change the locks despite the security team's recommendations during his absence. He wanted to maintain the feeling that this was still his home, even while he was away. The key turned smoothly in the lock, and Marcus stepped into the marble foyer. The house felt different somehow, not just quiet, but lived in a way that surprised him. There were fresh flowers on the side table, something Elena rarely bothered with when he was traveling. The air smelled faintly of cologne, but not his usual brand. Perhaps Elena had been entertaining business associates more frequently than she had mentioned in their calls. Marcus set his bag down and walked through the main hallway toward the kitchen, expecting to find Elena there. She often worked on her laptop at the kitchen island, managing her small interior design consulting business. The kitchen was empty, but there were 2 coffee cups in the sink, still slightly warm. Elena must have had a client meeting that morning. He climbed the curved staircase to the second floor, his hand trailing along the smooth banister. Family photos lined the walls, their wedding day, vacations they had taken, formal events they had attended together. Looking at them now, Marcus realized how much he had missed this life, this stability. The scandal had forced him to question everything, but seeing these reminders of their 10-year marriage reinforced his determination to rebuild what they had. The master bedroom door was closed, which was unusual. Elena typically left it open during the day unless she was napping, and it was too early for that. Marcus paused outside the door, suddenly, uncertain. What if she was on a business call? He didn't want to interrupt something important on his first day back. But this was his home, his wife, and he had been away for far too long. Marcus turned the handle and pushed the door open slowly, a smile already forming on his face as he prepared to surprise the woman he loved. The smile died instantly. Elena was there, but she wasn't alone. A man Marcus had never seen before was lying beside her in their bed, both of them clearly intimate, both completely unaware of his presence. The man appeared to be in his 30s, with dark hair and the kind of lean, athletic build that Marcus had once possessed before years of business dinners and executive stress had softened his frame. For several seconds that felt like hours, Marcus stood frozen in the doorway. His mind struggled to process what he was seeing, to reconcile the woman he had spoken to just 2 days ago, who had told him she missed him and couldn't wait for his return, with the reality before him now. Elena was laughing at something the man had said, her hand resting on his chest in a gesture so intimate and comfortable that it was clear this was not a recent development. This was not a moment of weakness or a mistake born from loneliness. This was a relationship, full and established, happening in the bed Marcus had shared with his wife for nearly a decade. The stranger noticed him first. The man's eyes widened as he spotted Marcus in the doorway, and he sat up quickly, reaching for a sheet to cover himself. The movement caught Elena's attention, and she turned toward the door with an annoyed expression, probably expecting to see their housekeeper, who had strict instructions not to disturb the bedroom during the day. Instead, she saw her husband. The color drained from Elena's face so quickly that Marcus thought she might faint. Her mouth opened and closed several times before any sound came out, and when it did, it was barely a whisper. "Marcus? You're supposed to be in Switzerland. You didn't say you were coming back." The accusation in her tone, as if this was somehow his fault for returning to his own home unannounced, snapped Marcus out of his shocked paralysis. He stepped into the room, his presence suddenly commanding despite the devastating circumstances. "I wanted to surprise you," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his chest. "It looks like I succeeded." The man in his bed had the grace to look ashamed, though he made no move to leave. Instead, he glanced between Marcus and Elena as if waiting for instructions on how to handle this situation. The casual nature of his presence, the way he seemed familiar with the room and comfortable in it, told Marcus everything he needed to know about how long this had been going on. Elena sat up, pulling the sheet around herself, and Marcus noticed she was wearing a necklace he had never seen before, a delicate silver chain with a small pendant that caught the light from the window. Even in this moment of crisis, he found himself cataloging these small betrayals, these evidence of a life she had built without him. "Marcus, I can explain," Elena began, but her words sounded hollow even to her. What explanation could possibly make sense of what he was witnessing? "Can you?" Marcus asked quietly. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks fairly self-explanatory." The stranger finally spoke, his voice uncertain but attempting some kind of dignity. "Maybe I should leave." "Maybe you should," Marcus agreed, never taking his eyes off his wife. "Though I'm curious how long you've been making yourself at home in my house." Elena flinched at the emphasis on my. But the stranger stood up, gathering his clothes from the floor with quick, efficient movements. He dressed rapidly, avoiding eye contact with Marcus, and headed for the door. "Don't leave through the front," Marcus said as the man passed him. "Use the back exit through the garden. I wouldn't want the neighbors to get the wrong impression about my wife's character." The sarcasm in his voice was cutting, and Elena's face crumpled as if he had struck her physically. The stranger left without another word, and Marcus listened to his footsteps fade down the hallway and disappeared down the back staircase. Now it was just the two of them, husband and wife, in the bedroom where they had once planned their future together. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows seemed mockingly bright for such a dark moment. Marcus walked to the window and looked out at the garden where Elena had planted roses during their second year of marriage. They were in full bloom now, tended by someone else while he was away. "How long?" he asked without turning around. Elena's voice was small, defeated. 6 months. 6 months. Half of the time he had been away, working to clear his name and rebuild his company so he could come home to her. Half of the time she had been lying to him on their video calls, telling him she missed him, asking when he would return. Half of the time she had been sharing their bed with another man. Is it serious? The question came out before Marcus could stop it, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Elena was quiet for so long that Marcus finally turned around. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, fully dressed now in a silk robe that had been a gift from him last Christmas. Tears were streaming down her face, but Marcus felt surprisingly unmoved by them. "I love him," she whispered. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, but he kept his expression neutral. In business, he had learned to never show weakness to an opponent, and right now, despite 10 years of marriage, Elena felt very much like an opponent. "I see," he said. "And does he love you?" Elena nodded, unable to speak. Marcus walked to his dresser and began removing items: his watch, his wedding ring, some cash from his wallet. Small actions that gave him something to do while his mind processed this new reality. His marriage was over. Not just damaged or strained, but completely, irrevocably finished. The woman he had trusted with everything, the woman he had protected during the scandal by keeping her name out of the media, the woman he had planned to grow old with, was in love with someone else. "What's his name?" Marcus asked, surprised by his own calmness. "David," Elena said. "David Harrison. He's a doctor. He works at the Children's Hospital downtown." A doctor, of course. Someone respectable, someone who helped people, someone whose reputation had never been questioned by federal investigators. Someone completely unlike Marcus, whose name had been dragged through the newspapers for months while the data breach investigation played out. "How did you meet him?" Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "At Sarah's charity fundraiser. You remember, the one for the children's cancer ward? You were supposed to come with me, but you had to fly to Geneva that week for the lawyers." Marcus remembered. It had been one of many social events Elena had attended alone during the height of his legal troubles. He had encouraged her to maintain their social connections while he dealt with the investigation, thinking it would be good for both of them if she had some normalcy in her life. He had never imagined he was giving her the opportunity to meet someone else. "So this is my fault," Marcus said, not as a question but as an observation. "Because I wasn't here to escort you to a party." "That's not what I meant," Elena said quickly. "It's not about fault. It just happened. We talked, we connected, and then you decided to bring him to our bed," Marcus finished. "While wearing your wedding ring, and telling me on video calls that you missed me." Elena's face crumpled again, but Marcus felt no satisfaction in her pain. This wasn't about revenge or punishment. This was about understanding how completely his life had just changed in the span of 5 minutes. "I never meant for this to happen," Elena said. "I was lonely, and you were so far away, and the investigation was taking so long. I didn't know if you'd ever really come back, or if your name would ever be cleared. So you gave up on me," Marcus said. "On us." "I tried not to," Elena insisted. "I tried to end it with David several times, but I couldn't. What we have is real, Marcus. It's not just about loneliness or convenience. I love him in a way that I—" She stopped herself, but Marcus knew what she had been about to say. She loved David in a way that she had never loved him. Or perhaps in a way that she had once loved him but no longer did. Either way, the implication was clear. Marcus sat down in the chair by the window, suddenly, feeling exhausted. The adrenaline of discovery was wearing off, replaced by a bone-deep weariness that seemed to settle into his very soul. He had spent 18 months fighting to clear his name, working 18-hour days with lawyers and investigators. Also, he could come home to this life. And now there was no life to come home to. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Elena looked up, surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "I mean, do you want a divorce? Do you want to be with him instead of me? Do you want me to leave so you can continue this relationship without having to sneak around?" The practical questions seemed to steady Elena, giving her something concrete to focus on instead of the emotional chaos of the moment. She took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders, and Marcus saw a glimpse of the strong, independent woman he had fallen in love with 12 years ago. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I know I can't keep doing this. Lying to you, lying to him, lying to myself. Something has to change." "Yes," Marcus agreed. "Something does." He stood up and walked toward the door, pausing in the doorway where he had stood just minutes earlier as his world collapsed. Elena called out to him, her voice desperate. "Where are you going?" Marcus turned back to look at his wife, perhaps for the last time as his wife. She looked small and lost in the large bedroom, surrounded by the luxury he had provided but apparently unable to appreciate anymore. "I don't know," he said, echoing her earlier words. "But I know I can't stay here tonight. Not in this house, not in this bed, not with these memories. Marcus, please, can't we talk about this? Can't we try to work something out?" He considered her request for a moment, genuinely weighing whether there was any path forward that didn't lead to the destruction of everything they had built together. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Elena in another man's arms, laughing and comfortable and happy in a way that had nothing to do with him. The executive apartment above Marcus Chin's office building had been designed as a practical space for late nights and early mornings, not as a place to rebuild a shattered life. But as Marcus sat on the minimalist leather sofa at 2 a.m, staring out at the city lights, it was the only place that felt safe from the wreckage of his marriage. He had spent the evening on the phone with his lawyer, Thomas Whitmore, explaining the situation in the same calm, professional tone he used for business crises. Thomas had been through Marcus's divorce once before, a brief marriage in his 20s that had ended amicably, but this was different. This time there were substantial assets involved, a company to protect, and a reputation that was still recovering from the data breach scandal. "The timing is unfortunate," Thomas had said with characteristic understatement. "The media will have a field day if this gets messy. We need to control the narrative from the beginning." Marcus understood the implications. His company's stock price had only recently stabilized after the scandal. News of a high-profile divorce, especially one involving infidelity, could send investors running again. He had worked too hard to rebuild his business empire to let his personal life destroy it now. But controlling the narrative meant making decisions about his marriage before he had fully processed what had happened. Marcus had built his career on quick, decisive action, but this felt different. This was about love and betrayal and the complete rewriting of his understanding of the woman he had shared his life with for 10 years. His phone buzzed with a text message from Elena. "Please come home. We need to talk about this properly." Marcus stared at the message for several minutes before deleting it without responding. He wasn't ready to talk, wasn't ready to hear explanations or apologies or whatever Elena thought might make this situation salvageable. He needed time to think, to plan, to decide what kind of man he wanted to be in the aftermath of this betrayal. The next morning, Marcus arrived at his company headquarters before 6 a.m., hours before most of his employees would begin their day. The building was quiet except for the security guards and cleaning crew, giving him the solitude he needed to focus on business rather than his personal chaos. Technova Solutions occupied 40 floors of the downtown high-rise, a testament to how far Marcus had come from his childhood in a cramped apartment with his immigrant parents. His father had worked double shifts at a factory while his mother cleaned office buildings at night, both of them sacrificing everything so their son could have opportunities they had never imagined. Marcus had promised himself that their sacrifices would not be wasted, and even in the darkest moments of the federal investigation, he had never lost sight of that promise. Now, as he rode the elevator to his executive suite on the 40th floor, Marcus felt that same determination returning. His marriage might be over, but his company was stronger than ever. The data breach investigation had actually forced him to implement security measures that made Technova more attractive to enterprise clients. Government contracts that had been suspended during the investigation were being renewed. New partnerships were being formed with companies that had previously been competitors. Rebecca was already at her desk when Marcus emerged from the elevator, despite the early hour. His assistant had been with him for 7 years, through the company's rapid growth, his marriage to Elena, and the nightmare of the federal investigation. If anyone understood the full scope of what he was dealing with, it was Rebecca. "You look like hell," she said without preamble, looking up from her computer screen. Rebecca was one of the few people who could speak to him with complete honesty, a privilege she had earned through years of loyalty and exceptional competence. "Thank you for the morning motivation," Marcus said dryly. "Coffee." Rebecca was already standing, reaching for the coffee maker that she kept stocked with his preferred blend. Double espresso, no sugar, and probably something stronger if you're planning to get through the day without collapsing. Marcus accepted the coffee gratefully and walked into his office, settling behind the massive desk that overlooked the city skyline. Rebecca followed, closing the door behind her and taking the chair across from him. Their standard morning routine, except nothing about this morning felt standard. Elena called the office phone 3 times last night, Rebecca said without being asked. I told her you weren't available and took messages, but she's persistent. Did she say what she wanted? To talk to you. To explain. To fix this. Rebecca's tone was carefully neutral, but Marcus detected a hint of skepticism. Rebecca had never particularly liked Elena, though she had always been professionally polite during their interactions. What did you tell her? That you would call her when you were ready to call her, and not before. Marcus smiled slightly, the first genuine smile he had felt since walking into his bedroom the previous afternoon. Rebecca's fierce protectiveness had been invaluable during the investigation, when reporters and prosecutors had tried every possible angle to reach him. Now it seemed she was prepared to extend that same protection to his personal life. Thank you, he said. I need some time before I deal with her directly. Of course. Rebecca consulted her tablet. You have a light schedule today, just the board meeting at 10 and lunch with the Peterson Group about the healthcare contract. I can reschedule both if you need the time. Marcus shook his head. No, I need the distraction. Business as usual. Is it though? Rebecca asked gently. Business as usual? It was a fair question. Marcus had built his success on being fully present and completely focused during business dealings. His ability to compartmentalize had served him well during the investigation, allowing him to separate his legal troubles from his company responsibilities. But this felt different, more personal, more devastating to his sense of who he was as a person. It will have to be, Marcus said, at least until I figure out what comes next. The board meeting went smoothly, with quarterly reports that exceeded expectations and new contract announcements that pleased the investors. Marcus found that he could indeed compartmentalize, discussing revenue projections and market expansion while his personal life crumbled in the background. His years of experience hiding his emotions during high-stakes negotiations served him well in hiding his emotional devastation from his colleagues. Lunch with the Peterson Group was more challenging. Sarah Peterson, the company's CEO, was one of Elena's closest friends and had been instrumental in introducing Elena to the charity social circle where she had apparently met her lover. Sarah's casual questions about Elena's well-being and whether Marcus was planning to attend upcoming social events were innocent enough, but they felt like needles in an open wound. Elena mentioned you've been traveling quite a bit, Sarah said over their appetizers. It must be nice to finally be back home and settled. Yes, Marcus agreed, keeping his voice steady. It's certainly been an adjustment. I'm sure Elena is thrilled to have you back. She's been such a trooper during your time away, staying busy with her design work and staying active in our charitable activities. We've really admired how well she's handled everything. Marcus wondered if Sarah knew about David Harrison, if the entire social circle was aware of his wife's affair while he had been obliviously fighting for his reputation in Switzerland. The possibility that he had been the subject of gossip and pity among Elena's friends added another layer of humiliation to an already devastating situation. She's always been very independent, Marcus said carefully. I've always admired that about her. After lunch, Marcus returned to his office and found a stack of messages from Elena, along with several from numbers he didn't recognize. Word was apparently getting out about his return, and people were beginning to ask questions about why he wasn't at home with his wife. In their social circle, appearances mattered enormously, and a billionaire's marriage troubles would be irresistible gossip. Rebecca appeared in his doorway holding a large floral arrangement, 24 white roses with a card attached. These just arrived, she said, setting them on the side table near his window. Marcus opened the card and read Elena's handwriting. I'm sorry. Please give me a chance to explain everything. I love you. Elena, the words that might have meant something 24 hours ago now felt like empty platitudes. Elena loved him, but she was also in love with someone else. She was sorry, but sorry enough to end her affair and recommit to their marriage? The card didn't say, and Marcus wasn't sure it mattered. Should I send a response? Rebecca asked. No, Marcus said, placing the card in his desk drawer. Not yet. The afternoon brought a series of routine meetings and conference calls that helped Marcus maintain his focus on business rather than his personal crisis. But, by evening, the quiet of his temporary apartment began to feel oppressive. He needed to make decisions about his living situation, his marriage, and his future, but he felt paralyzed by the enormity of those decisions. His phone rang at 8 p.m., and Elena's name appeared on the screen. Marcus stared at it through several rings before finally answering. Hello, Elena. Marcus, thank you for answering. I wasn't sure you would. Her voice sounded small and uncertain, so different from the confident woman who had been laughing in another man's arms just 24 hours earlier. Marcus found himself analyzing her tone the way he would analyze a business rival's negotiating position, looking for weakness or deception. What do you want? He asked. I want to see you. I want to explain what happened, how we got to this point. I want to try to save our marriage. Do you? Marcus asked. Because yesterday afternoon it looked like you had already made your choice about our marriage. Elena was quiet for several seconds. It's complicated, Marcus. My feelings for David are real, but that doesn't mean I stopped caring about you. We have 10 years together. We have a life, a history, shared dreams. That has to count for something. Shared dreams, Marcus repeated. Like the dream where you remained faithful to your husband while he was away dealing with a crisis that could have destroyed everything we built. That's not fair, Elena said, her voice gaining strength. You were gone for 18 months. 18 months of uncertainty, of not knowing if you'd ever be cleared, if we'd ever have a normal life again. I was alone, dealing with reporters and investigators and people who looked at me like I was married to a criminal. Marcus felt his first flash of real anger since the discovery. So this is my fault. Because I was away fighting for my freedom and my company, you decided to console yourself with another man. It's not about fault, Elena said. It's about what happened. I met David, and we connected, and it grew into something I never expected. I never meant to fall in love with him. But you did fall in love with him, Marcus said. And you brought him into our home, into our bed, while continuing to tell me that you missed me and couldn't wait for me to come back. Elena began crying, soft sobs that might have moved Marcus if he hadn't seen her in David Harrison's arms. I know how it looks. I know I hurt you. But I was trying to hold everything together. My feelings for you, my feelings for David, the hope that somehow this could all work out. How exactly did you imagine this working out? Marcus asked. Were you planning to tell me about David when I came home? Were you going to ask for an open marriage? Or were you just going to keep lying to both of us indefinitely? I don't know, Elena admitted. I thought maybe my feelings for David would fade, or maybe you'd decide to stay in Switzerland permanently. I was hoping something would happen to make the decision for me. The casual way she discussed the possibility of him never returning home, as if his permanent exile would have been a convenient solution to her romantic dilemma, cut deeper than anything else she had said. Marcus realized that while he had been fighting to return to their life together, Elena had been hoping he would simply disappear from it. I see, Marcus said quietly. So my coming home was actually an inconvenience for you. That's not what I meant, Elena said quickly. I'm glad you're home. I'm glad your name was cleared. I just wish the timing had been different. Different how? So you could have more time with David before I interfered with your happiness? Elena didn't answer, which was answer enough. Marcus stood up and walked to the window of his apartment, looking down at the busy street below. People were heading home from work, from dinner, from evening activities, all of them presumably returning to lives that made sense, to relationships built on honesty and trust. He envied their certainty. Marcus, are you still there? I'm here, he said. I'm trying to decide if there's any point in continuing this conversation. Of course there's a point, Elena said desperately. We're married. We made vows to each other. Doesn't that mean something to you? It meant everything to me, Marcus said. Apparently it meant less to you. That's not true. I take our vows seriously. Which vows specifically? Marcus asked. The one about forsaking all others? Because you seem to have forgotten that one. Elena was quiet again, and Marcus could hear her crying more heavily now. He felt no satisfaction in her pain, but he also felt no inclination to comfort her. She had made choices that had led them to this moment, and the consequences of those choices were not his responsibility to manage. What do you want me to do? Elena asked finally. Do you want me to end things with David? Do you want me to choose between you? The question he had been dreading had finally been asked directly. Marcus realized that he had been hoping Elena would volunteer to end the affair, would declare her commitment to their marriage without being asked. The fact that she was presenting it as a choice, as if she needed to weigh the options between her husband and her lover, told him everything he needed to know about where her heart truly lay. I want you to choose, Marcus said. But I want you to choose honestly, based on what you actually want, not on what you think you should want or what would be convenient or practical. And if I choose David? Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the last of his hopes for their marriage finally die. Then, I'll respect that choice and we'll proceed with a divorce. And if I choose you? Then, you'll end things with David completely, and we'll try to rebuild our marriage, Marcus said. But, Elena, you should know that if you choose me and then change your mind, if you try to maintain contact with him or if this happens again with anyone else, I won't give you another chance. This is it. This is the one opportunity to save what we have. Elena was crying openly now, and Marcus found himself feeling sorry for her despite everything. She had created this impossible situation, but she was still the woman he had loved for 10 years. Some part of him would always care about her happiness, even if they couldn't find that happiness together. I need time to think, Elena said. Take all the time you need, Marcus said. But understand that I'm not going to wait indefinitely. I won't put my life on hold while you decide whether or not you want to be my wife. How much time do I have? Marcus considered the question. A week. Decide by next Tuesday, and then we'll move forward accordingly. A week, Elena repeated. That's not very long. The week that would determine Marcus Chin's future began with an unexpected phone call at 6 in the morning from his brother Daniel. Marcus had been awake for hours anyway, staring at spreadsheets and financial reports that couldn't quite distract him from the countdown in his head. 6 days until Elena's decision. I heard about you, and Elena, Daniel said without preamble. Are you okay? Marcus sat up in his temporary bed, surprised by the call. He and Daniel had grown closer during the investigation, when his younger brother had been one of the few people to never doubt his innocence. But they rarely discussed personal matters, preferring to bond over business discussions and their shared memories of their parents' struggles. How did you hear? Elena called Mom yesterday, Daniel said. Apparently, she needed someone to talk to. And since your mother-in-law is in Florida and her own mother isn't speaking to her after that business with the trust fund, she decided to confess everything to the woman who raised the man she's been cheating on. Marcus closed his eyes, imagining that conversation. His mother, Margaret Chun, had never fully warmed to Elena, though she had been polite and welcoming throughout their marriage. Margaret was old-fashioned about marriage vows and family loyalty, having sacrificed everything to build a life with Marcus's father. Learning that Elena had been unfaithful would not have been well received. What did Mom say? Nothing printable, Daniel replied. Though I believe her exact words were that Elena was a foolish girl who doesn't know the value of a good man. Then, she asked if you needed her to come stay with you. The offer of maternal support, while touching, was exactly what Marcus didn't need. His 70-year-old mother hovering around his temporary apartment, cooking elaborate meals, and offering unsolicited advice about his marriage, would make an already difficult situation unbearable. Tell her I appreciate the offer. But, I'm fine, Marcus said. Are you fine? Daniel asked. Because Mom also mentioned that Elena seemed to think you might just disappear again, maybe go back to Europe permanently. She's worried you're running away from this instead of fighting for what you want. Marcus stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the early morning traffic beginning to build on the streets below. What exactly am I supposed to fight for? Elena is in love with someone else. You can't fight love. You can fight for your marriage, Daniel said. You can remind her why she married you in the first place. You can make her choose you instead of just giving her the option to choose you. I'm not going to beg my wife to stay married to me, Marcus said firmly. If she wants to be with David Harrison more than she wants to be with me, then she should be with him. I won't force her to stay out of guilt or obligation. Daniel was quiet for a moment. You know, for a guy who built a billion-dollar company by refusing to accept defeat, You're being remarkably passive about this." The observation stung because it contained truth. Marcus had never been passive about anything that mattered to him. When the federal investigation had threatened his company, he had hired the best lawyers, worked around the clock to cooperate with authorities, and systematically rebuilt his reputation one client at a time. When competitors had tried to steal market share during his legal troubles, he had launched new products and secured major contracts that proved his company's strength. But this felt different. Business problems had solutions that could be researched, planned, and executed. Heart problems were messier, more unpredictable, and success couldn't be guaranteed through hard work and strategic thinking. "This isn't a business deal," Marcus told his brother. "I can't negotiate Elena's feelings." "Maybe not," Daniel said. "But you can remind her why those feelings existed in the first place." After ending the call, Marcus found himself thinking about Daniel's words as he went through his morning routine. Had he been too passive? Too accepting of Elena's betrayal? He had given her an ultimatum: choose between her husband and her lover, but he hadn't actually tried to influence that choice. He had presented himself as one of two options rather than as the man she had once loved enough to marry. The realization bothered him throughout the morning as he dealt with routine business matters. During a conference call about a potential acquisition in Southeast Asia, Marcus found his mind wandering to memories of his early relationship with Elena. They had met at a technology conference where she was working as an event coordinator and he was a keynote speaker. Elena had been confident, funny, and completely unimpressed by his wealth or growing reputation. She had challenged his ideas, made him laugh, and shown him that success meant nothing without someone to share it with. When had that dynamic changed? When had Elena stopped challenging him and started simply accepting his decisions? When had their relationship become more about the lifestyle he could provide than about the connection they shared? By noon, Marcus had made a decision that would have seemed impossible 3 days earlier. Instead of waiting passively for Elena's choice, he was going to remind her why they had built a life together in the first place. His first stop was the luxury jewelry store where he had bought Elena's engagement ring 11 years earlier. The elderly salesman, Mr. Patel, recognized him immediately and greeted him with the warm professionalism of someone who had sold him several anniversary gifts over the years. "Mr. Chun, welcome back," Mr. Patel said. "How may I help you today?" Marcus explained what he was looking for, not another piece of jewelry, but the story behind the original ring. Mr. Patel smiled and disappeared into the back room, returning with a thick leather journal where he kept detailed records of significant sales. "Ah yes," Mr. Patel said, finding the correct page. "December 15th, 11 years ago. You came in 3 times before making your decision. You spent 4 hours looking at different options, asking questions about cuts and settings and certifications. You said you wanted something that would remind her every day that she was loved completely." Marcus remembered those visits, remembered his anxiety about choosing something perfect for the woman who had already agreed to marry him. Elena had told him she didn't need an elaborate ring, that a simple band would be sufficient, but Marcus had wanted to give her something extraordinary, not because of the cost, but because of what it represented. "You chose the vintage Art Deco setting because you said she loved old movies," Mr. Patel continued. "And you had us engrave the inside with a quote from Casablanca. What was it?" "Here's looking at you, kid," Marcus said, remembering Elena's tears when she first discovered the engraving. "She cried when you proposed, didn't she?" Mr. Patel asked kindly. "They always remember the crying ones." True love shows. Marcus left the jewelry store with a renewed sense of purpose and a plan that was either brilliant or completely foolish. He spent the afternoon making arrangements that he hadn't made since their early dating days. Dinner reservations at the small Italian restaurant where they had their first date, tickets to the classic film festival that Elena loved, flowers from the same florist who had provided their wedding arrangements. But this wasn't about grand gestures or expensive gifts. This was about reminding Elena of who they had been together before life became complicated by business pressures, social obligations, and the distance that had grown between them during his legal troubles. The most difficult part was calling Elena to arrange the evening. She answered on the second ring, her voice cautious and hopeful. "Marcus, is everything okay? I want to take you to dinner tonight," he said. "Just the two of us. No lawyers, no ultimatums, No discussions about David. Just dinner. Elena was quiet for several seconds. Why? Because we've been married for 10 years, and I realized that somewhere along the way, I forgot to keep dating my wife, Marcus said. I'd like to remember what that felt like. Marcus, I don't think this is a good idea. It's going to make everything more complicated. Everything is already complicated, Marcus pointed out. One dinner isn't going to change that. Elena sighed, and Marcus could picture her standing in their kitchen, probably wearing one of the casual dresses she favored for working from home. Where? Salvatore's. 7 o'clock. That's where we had our first date, Elena said softly. I remember, Marcus said. Do you? Of course I remember. I wore that blue dress you said made my eyes look like sapphires. You were so nervous you knocked over the wine glass before the appetizers arrived. The memory made Marcus smile, his first genuine smile since returning home. I was terrified you'd figure out that I had no idea what I was doing. What made you think I had any more experience than you did? Elena asked, and there was laughter in her voice for the first time since their devastating phone conversation. You seemed so confident, so sure of yourself. I thought I was the only one who was completely out of my depth. I spent an hour getting ready, Elena admitted. I changed clothes 3 times and called my sister for advice about what to order so I wouldn't look unsophisticated. They talked for several more minutes about that first date, about the early days of their relationship when everything was new and uncertain and electric with possibility. When they ended the call, Marcus felt more hopeful than he had since walking into his bedroom and discovering Elena with another man. Salvatore's looked exactly the same as it had 11 years earlier. Dim lighting, checkered tablecloths, and the smell of garlic and fresh bread that had made Marcus's mouth water during that first nervous dinner. The owner, an ancient Italian man named Giuseppe, greeted Marcus with the enthusiasm of someone welcoming back a long-lost family member. Mr. Chun, we have not seen you in too long. And Mrs. Chun, she looks beautiful as always. Elena had indeed chosen carefully for the evening. She wore a simple black dress that Marcus had bought her last Christmas, along with the pearl earrings that had been his gift for their 5th anniversary. Her hair was styled the way she had worn it when they first met, and she looked younger somehow, less burdened by the weight of the decisions she was carrying. They were seated at the same corner table where they had shared their first meal together, and, for a moment, Marcus could almost pretend that they were the same people who had fallen in love over shared stories and nervous laughter. You look beautiful, Marcus said, holding her chair as she sat down. Thank you, Elena replied, and he noticed that she was wearing her wedding ring. She had taken it off during their phone conversations, but tonight it was back in its place on her finger. They ordered the same meals they had shared on that first date: pasta marinara for Elena, veal parmesan for Marcus, and a bottle of Chianti that Giuseppe selected personally. The conversation started tentatively, both of them carefully avoiding the subjects that had brought them to this crossroads. Instead, they talked about the early days of Marcus's company, when he had been working 18-hour days in a cramped office, and Elena had been building her event planning business. They remembered the tiny apartment they had shared during their engagement, the vacation to Italy where Marcus had proposed, the joy of buying their first house together. Do you remember the night we designed the mansion? Elena asked over dessert. We stayed up until 3 in the morning drawing floor plans on napkins. You insisted on a library, Marcus said, even though we both read everything on tablets by then. I said someday we'd have children who would want real books, Elena replied, then stopped abruptly as she realized what she had said. Children had been part of their plan once, but business demands, and then the investigation had kept pushing the timeline further into the future. Now, with Elena possibly leaving for another man, those children would never exist. Elena, Marcus began, but she shook her head. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring that up. Why not? Marcus asked. It's part of what we planned together. It's part of what we're losing if you choose David. Elena looked down at her hands, and Marcus noticed she was turning her wedding ring nervously. David wants children too, she said quietly. The admission hit Marcus like a physical blow. Elena wasn't just choosing between 2 men. She was choosing between 2 different futures, 2 different versions of the life she wanted to live. David represented everything that Marcus had been too busy or too distracted to provide: attention, romance, and, apparently, a shared vision of starting a family. I see, Marcus said carefully. And you think he'd be a better father than I would? It's not about better or worse, Elena said. It's about being present. About making family a priority instead of something that happens when business allows. The criticism stung because it was accurate. Marcus had always assumed that children would fit into his life when the timing was right, when the company was stable enough, when he could afford to take time away from building his empire. He had never considered that Elena might not want to wait indefinitely for him to be ready. You're right, Marcus said, surprising Elena with his honesty. I have been putting business first. I thought I was building something for our future, but I was neglecting our present. Elena looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time since they had sat down. I know you were working for us, for our future. But, Marcus, I needed you with me, not just working for me. And David gives you that. Elena nodded. He's there when I need him. He listens when I talk about my work, my dreams, my fears. He makes me feel like I'm the most important thing in his life. Marcus felt his chest tighten as he realized how completely he had failed as a husband. He had provided for Elena financially, had given her a beautiful home and expensive gifts and access to exclusive social circles. But he had stopped making her feel cherished, had stopped prioritizing her emotional needs over his business obligations. I'm sorry, he said. I'm sorry I made you feel like you weren't important. You are the most important thing in my life, Elena. I just forgot to show you that. Tears began running down Elena's cheeks, and Marcus reached across the table to take her hand. She didn't pull away, but she didn't squeeze back either. I know you love me, Elena said. But love isn't always enough, is it? We need to be compatible, to want the same things, to make each other happy. And somewhere along the way, we stopped making each other happy. Marcus wanted to argue, to point out all the good times they had shared, all the ways they had supported each other through various challenges. But he couldn't deny the truth in what Elena was saying. Their marriage had become more about routine than romance, more about maintaining their lifestyle than nurturing their relationship. What if we could find our way back? Marcus asked. What if we could remember how to make each other happy? Elena wiped her eyes with her napkin. I don't know if we can. Too much has changed, Marcus. I've changed. I know what it feels like to be with someone who puts me first, who doesn't see love as something to be scheduled around board meetings and business trips. Give me a chance, Marcus said. Give us a chance to try again. Even after what I've done, even knowing that I fell in love with someone else. Marcus considered the question seriously. Could he forgive Elena's betrayal? Could he trust her again? Could he live with the knowledge that she had chosen another man, even if she ultimately chose to return to their marriage? I don't know, Marcus said honestly. But I know I love you enough to try. The question is whether you love me enough to try too. Elena pulled her hand away and reached for her purse. I need to think about all of this. Tonight, seeing you like this, remembering what we used to be, it's confusing everything. Good, Marcus said. It should be confusing. Choosing between two people Saturday morning brought an unexpected visitor to Marcus's temporary apartment. He was reviewing quarterly projections when Rebecca called to warn him that Elena was on her way up, having convinced the building's security that she had an urgent matter to discuss with her husband. Marcus barely had time to close his laptop before Elena knocked on the door. When he opened it, he was surprised to see that she looked terrible, pale, exhausted, and wearing the same clothes she had worn to dinner 2 nights earlier. Have you slept? Marcus asked, stepping aside to let her enter. Not much, Elena admitted, walking into the small living space and looking around at the sparse furniture and temporary arrangements. This is where you've been staying? It's functional, Marcus said. Coffee. Elena nodded and sat down on the leather sofa while Marcus prepared 2 cups from the machine he had brought from his office. Her presence in the small space felt strange and intimate, as if they were playing house in someone else's life. I've been thinking about what you said at dinner, Elena began. About giving us another chance, about trying to find our way back to what we used to have. Marcus handed her the coffee and sat down in the chair across from her, maintaining some distance while he tried to read her expression. Elena's face had always been expressive, but this morning she looked guarded, as if she was protecting herself from whatever conversation was about to happen. And Marcus prompted, and I think you're right that we lost something along the way. We stopped being partners, and became two people living parallel lives in the same house. Elena sipped her coffee and stared out the window at the city skyline. But, Marcus, I need you to understand something. My relationship with David isn't just about you being absent or distracted. It's about who I am when I'm with him versus who I became when I was with you. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. What do you mean? I mean that with David, I laugh more. I take risks. I have opinions about things beyond interior design and charity committees. He challenges me to think, to grow, to become a better version of myself. The words stung, but Marcus forced himself to listen without defensiveness. And with me? With you? I became comfortable. Safe. I let myself become the version of Elena that worked well with your lifestyle, your business needs, your social expectations. I stopped pushing for what I wanted because it seemed easier to adapt to what you needed. Elena set down her coffee cup and looked directly at Marcus for the first time since arriving. Do you know that I wanted to start my own interior design firm 5 years ago? Not just consulting for friends, but a real business with employees and major clients and the chance to make a real impact. Marcus frowned. You never told me that. Yes, I did, Elena said firmly. I brought it up several times, but you were always in the middle of some business crisis or expansion plan. You'd say we'd talk about it later when things settled down. Eventually, I stopped bringing it up. Marcus searched his memory and found fragments of conversations he had dismissed as Elena's hobby interests rather than serious professional aspirations. I didn't realize you were serious about it. That's the problem, Elena said. You didn't realize because you weren't paying attention to what I wanted, only to what worked for your schedule. The criticism was harsh, but fair. Marcus had become so focused on building his empire that he had stopped seeing Elena as an individual with her own dreams and goals. She had become a supporting character in his story rather than the co-star she had been in their early years together. You're right, Marcus said. I should have been more supportive of your career goals. It's not just about career, Elena continued. It's about everything. When was the last time we planned a vacation that wasn't connected to your business? When was the last time we had friends over who weren't potential clients or board members? When was the last time you asked me what I wanted to do on a weekend instead of assuming I'd adapt to whatever you had scheduled? Each question hit home because Marcus couldn't remember recent examples of any of those things. Their social life had become an extension of his business networking. Their travels had been timed around his conference schedule. Even their home had been designed primarily to accommodate his need for a home office and entertainment space for business associates. David pays attention to what I want, Elena said quietly. He asks about my day, my work, my opinions about books and movies and politics. He remembers things I mention in passing and follows up on them later. He makes me feel interesting and valued and heard. Marcus stood up and walked to the window, needing movement to process what Elena was telling him. She wasn't just comparing two men. She was comparing two completely different ways of being in a relationship. David offered Elena partnership and attention. Marcus had apparently offered her security and luxury while expecting her to revolve around his priorities. What do you want from me now? Marcus asked. Do you want me to compete with David by promising to change everything about how I've been as a husband? I don't know, Elena said honestly. Part of me wants to believe that you can change, that we can build something different together. But, Marcus, you've been this way for years. Your company has only grown bigger. Your responsibilities have only increased. Even if you have the best intentions, how can I trust that you won't fall back into the same patterns? It was a fair question. Marcus had built his success by being completely focused on business, by prioritizing growth and profit and market dominance above almost everything else. Could he really change that fundamental approach to life? Did he even want to? What if I stepped back from day-to-day operations? Marcus heard himself saying. What if I hired a CEO to run the company while I focused on being a better husband? Elena looked surprised by the suggestion. Would you really consider that? Marcus thought about the idea seriously. He had built Technova from nothing, had poured his heart and soul into every aspect of its growth and success. The company was his legacy, his proof that the son of immigrants could achieve the American dream through hard work and determination. But what was the point of achieving that dream if he lost everything that mattered in the process? I would consider anything that might save our marriage, Marcus said. But Elena, I need to know that you're willing to fight for us too. I need to know that if I make these changes, you're committed to ending your relationship with David and rebuilding what we have together. Elena stood up and joined him at the window, both of them looking out at the city where they had built their life together. That's just it, Marcus. I don't know if I can make that commitment without knowing whether the changes would stick. And you don't know if you can make those changes without knowing that I'm fully committed to us. They stood in silence for several minutes, both recognizing the impossible circular nature of their situation. Trust had to be rebuilt, but rebuilding trust required a leap of faith from both of them that neither felt ready to make. There's something else, Elena said finally. David asked me to move in with him. Marcus felt as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. Yesterday, he said he's tired of sneaking around, tired of sharing me with you. He wants us to be a real couple, openly, without hiding. And what did you tell him? I told him I needed until Tuesday to make my decision. The same deadline you gave me. Marcus turned to face Elena, studying her expression for any hint of what she was thinking. So you're not just choosing between staying married to me or divorcing me. You're choosing between two complete lives, staying with me and trying to rebuild our marriage, or leaving me to start over with David. Elena nodded. That's what makes this so hard. It's not just about ending one relationship. It's about choosing which future I want. What does your heart tell you? Marcus asked. Elena's eyes filled with tears. My heart is torn in two. I love you, Marcus. I love our history, our memories, the life we built together. But I also love David, and the person I am when I'm with him. You can't have both, Marcus said gently. I know, Elena whispered. Believe me, I know. Marcus pulled Elena into his arms, and, for a moment, they held each other the way they had during their early years together. Elena felt small and fragile against his chest, and Marcus was struck by how much he had missed the simple intimacy of comforting his wife. Whatever you decide, Marcus said into her hair, I want you to know that I understand why you fell in love with David. I understand that I failed you as a husband in ways I'm only now beginning to recognize. Elena pulled back to look at him. You didn't fail me entirely. You gave me security, adventure, opportunities one never could have had without you. You introduced me to a world I never knew existed. Those things matter too. But they're not enough, Marcus said. They're not enough without the other things. Without feeling seen and heard and valued for who I am instead of how well I fit into your life. Marcus kissed Elena's forehead, a gesture that felt both familiar and heartbreaking. 2 more days. 2 more days, Elena agreed. After Elena left, Marcus found himself unable to focus on work or anything else. He walked the streets of downtown, thinking about their conversation and what it revealed about the fundamental differences between what he and David offered Elena. David offered Elena partnership, attention, and the chance to be the best version of herself. Marcus offered security, luxury, and the continuation of a life they had built together over 10 years. Neither option was clearly superior. They were simply different paths that would lead to different futures. That afternoon, Marcus made a decision that surprised even him. He called Thomas Whitmore and asked his lawyer to draw up papers that would formalize his offer to step back from daily operations at Technova. If Elena chose to stay with him, he wanted to be able to prove his commitment to change wasn't just empty promises. He also called a headhunter and began the process of identifying potential CEOs who could take over the company's operations while he remained as chairman of the board. The conversations were difficult because they forced him to articulate a future where his identity wasn't completely tied to his role as a hands-on CEO. But Marcus found that the more he thought about it, the more appealing the idea became. He was 42 years old and wealthy beyond anything he had dreamed of as a child. He had proven everything he needed to prove about his business acumen. Maybe it was time to prove that he could be as successful at marriage as he had been at making money. That evening, Marcus wrote Elena a letter by hand, something he hadn't done since their early courtship days. In it, he laid out his vision for their future together, his plan to step back from the company, his commitment to supporting her interior design business, his desire to travel with her for pleasure rather than business, his hope that they could still start a family together. But he also acknowledged the reality that these changes might not be enough, that Elena's feelings for David might be too strong to overcome with promises of a different kind of marriage. I love you enough to let you go if that's what will make you happy, Marcus wrote. But I love you too much not to fight for the chance to prove that we can build something better together. Monday crawled by with excruciating slowness. Marcus tried to maintain his normal business routine, but every phone call and meeting felt surreal, as if he was watching someone else live his life while he waited for Elena to decide their future. Rebecca noticed his distraction immediately. You're going to wear a hole in the carpet if you keep pacing like that, she said, looking up from her desk as Marcus made another circuit around his office. Did Elena call? Marcus asked for the fourth time that morning. No, and I'll tell you immediately if she does, Rebecca replied patiently. Just like I told you the last 3 times you asked. Marcus forced himself to sit down at his desk, but within minutes, he was standing again, drawn to the window that looked out over the city where Elena was making the most important decision of their lives. Somewhere out there, she was weighing love against love, past against future, security against possibility. At noon, Marcus's mother called, ostensibly to check on his eating habits, but clearly hoping for updates about Elena's decision. Have you heard anything? Margaret Chin asked in her heavily accented English that became more pronounced when she was worried. Not yet, Mom. Tomorrow is the deadline. That girl doesn't know how lucky she is, Margaret said with the fierce protectiveness that had gotten Marcus through childhood poverty and adolescent struggles. You are a good man, Marcus. Any woman should be proud to be your wife. Marcus smiled despite his anxiety. His mother's unconditional support was comforting, even if it wasn't entirely objective. It's not that simple, Mom. Marriage is complicated. Marriage is not complicated, Margaret said firmly. You love each other, you work together, you build a life. This American idea that you should always be happy, always be excited, that is what makes trouble. Marcus understood his mother's perspective. She and his father had immigrated with nothing, worked brutal hours for decades, and built their lives around duty and sacrifice rather than personal fulfillment. Their marriage had lasted 45 years because they had seen it as a partnership in survival rather than a source of romantic satisfaction. But Marcus also understood Elena's perspective. She hadn't grown up struggling for basic necessities. She had the luxury of expecting marriage to be emotionally fulfilling as well as practically functional. And Marcus had to admit that David seemed to offer her both. Maybe you're right, Mom, Marcus said. But Elena and I have different ideas about what marriage should be. Then, you teach her, Margaret said simply. You show her what real love looks like. Not this Hollywood nonsense, but real love that lasts through problems. After ending the call with his mother, Marcus found himself thinking about the different models of marriage that had shaped his and Elena's expectations. His parents had shown him that marriage was about commitment and partnership through difficult circumstances. Elena's parents had divorced when she was 12, then both remarried for love and emotional compatibility rather than practical necessity. Neither model was wrong, but they were fundamentally different approaches to building a life with another person. Perhaps that incompatibility was at the heart of their problems, more than David Harrison or Marcus's business obsession or any of the other factors they had been discussing. At 3 o'clock, Rebecca knocked on his office door. David Harrison is here to see you. Marcus looked up in surprise. What? Elena's friend. He's in the lobby, asking to speak with you. He says it's important. Marcus considered refusing the meeting, but curiosity won out over pride. Send him up. David Harrison was younger than Marcus had expected from Elena's brief glimpse of him in their bedroom. Probably early 30s, with the lean build and confident bearing of someone who was used to making life and death decisions in emergency rooms. He wore khakis and a button-down shirt rather than a suit, giving him a casual, approachable appearance that Marcus supposed patients and nurses would find reassuring. Mr. Chun, David said, extending his hand as he entered Marcus's office. Thank you for seeing me. I'm David Harrison. Marcus shook his hand, noting the firm grip and steady eye contact. Whatever David's faults might be, cowardice apparently wasn't among them. It took courage to visit the husband of the woman you were in love with. Please, sit down, Marcus said, gesturing to one of the chairs across from his desk. Can I offer you something to drink? No, thank you. David sat down but remained tense, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. I want to be honest with you about why I'm here. Marcus leaned back in his chair, maintaining the neutral expression he used for difficult business negotiations. I'm listening. Elena told me about the choice she has to make by tomorrow. She told me about your dinner together, about your letter, about your offer to change how you approach your marriage. Marcus nodded but said nothing, letting David control the direction of the conversation. I want you to know that I never intended for this situation to happen, David continued. When I met Elena at that charity event, I had no idea she was married to you. She wasn't wearing her wedding ring that night, and she didn't mention her husband until we had already connected. When did you find out? Marcus asked. Not until our third date, David admitted. By then, I was already falling in love with her. And Elena told me that you had been gone for over a year, that she didn't know when or if you'd be coming back, that your marriage had essentially been over since the investigation began. Marcus felt a flash of anger at Elena's misrepresentation of their relationship, but he kept his voice level. Our marriage was strained by the distance and uncertainty, but it was far from over. I know that now, David said. But, at the time, Elena seemed like a woman who had been abandoned by her husband when she needed him most. The accusation stung because it contained enough truth to be devastating. Marcus had essentially abandoned Elena, even if his reasons had been legally and financially necessary. He had chosen to fight his battles alone rather than bringing his wife into the war zone of federal investigations and media scrutiny. Why are you here? Marcus asked. What do you hope to accomplish with this conversation? David leaned forward, his composure slipping for the first time since arriving. I want to convince you to let her go. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Excuse me. Elena is torn apart by this decision, David said. She loves you, but she's also in love with me. She feels guilty about Indy. He sealed the letter and had it delivered to Elena that night, along with a single white rose, the same flower he had given her after their first date 11 years ago. Sunday passed slowly, with Marcus alternating between confidence that Elena would choose their marriage and certainty that she would leave him for the uncomplicated love David offered. He cleaned out his office, preparing for the possibility that he might indeed step back from daily operations. He also began looking at apartments, preparing for the possibility that he might need a more permanent living situation if Elena chose to divorce him. By Sunday evening, Marcus felt as prepared as he could be for whatever Elena would decide. He had done everything possible to show her that he understood what had gone wrong in their marriage, and that he was committed to change. He had offered her everything he could think of, his attention, his time, his willingness to restructure his entire life around their relationship. Now it was up to Elena to decide if love and history and the promise of change could compete with the certainty of new love and a fresh start. Monday morning would bring the final day of waiting. Marcus only hoped that whatever Elena decided, they could both live with the consequences of her choice. Elena stood to leave, then paused beside his chair. Marcus, thank you for tonight, for reminding me why I fell in love with you in the first place. She leaned down and kissed his cheek, a soft, lingering touch that felt like both a goodbye and a possibility. After she left, Marcus sat alone at their table for another hour, finishing the wine and thinking about everything Elena had said. He had learned more about his wife's feelings in one evening than he had in months of phone calls during his exile. But he still didn't know what her final decision would be. For more days to wait. For more days to hope that love and history and the promise of change would be enough to compete with the certainty of new romance and the appeal of starting fresh. Marcus paid the check and walked out into the cool evening air, feeling more uncertain about the future than ever, but also more determined to fight for the marriage he had nearly lost through neglect and assumption. Elena was right that love wasn't always enough. But sometimes, Marcus thought, it was worth fighting for anyway. It's long enough to know what you want, Marcus said. The real question is whether you're brave enough to admit it to yourself and to me. After they ended the call, Marcus poured himself a glass of scotch and sat back down on the leather sofa. 1 week to learn whether his marriage could be saved or whether he would be starting over completely at 42 years old. 1 week to discover if the woman he had built his life around would choose him or the man she had been sharing their bed with. Marcus had negotiated billion-dollar deals with less anxiety than he felt about this decision that was completely out of his control. For the first time in his adult life, his success and determination and resources were irrelevant. The outcome depended entirely on Elena's heart, and he was no longer certain he knew that heart at all. The city lights twinkled below his window, and Marcus wondered if David Harrison was looking at the same lights from somewhere else in the city. Was he wondering what Elena's choice would be? Was he confident in her love, or was he as uncertain about the future as Marcus felt? 1 week would tell them all what came next. Marcus only hoped he would be strong enough to handle whatever Elena decided. Maybe, he said finally. But not today. Today I need to figure out what my life looks like now. Marcus left the bedroom and walked down the hallway, past the family photos that now seemed like artifacts from someone else's life. He collected his bag from the foyer and called for a car, standing on the front steps of the home he had designed and built and filled with dreams of forever. As he waited for the car to arrive, Marcus looked back at the house one more time. Elena appeared at the master bedroom window, watching him leave. Even from a distance, he could see she was crying, but he felt strangely detached from her pain. His own pain was so complete, so overwhelming, that there was no room for sympathy for the woman who had caused it. The car pulled up, and Marcus climbed into the back seat without looking back. He gave the driver the address of his downtown office building, which had a small apartment he sometimes used for late work sessions. It would do for tonight while he figured out what came next. As the car pulled away from the house, Marcus realized that coming home had indeed been full of surprises, just not the kind he had been expecting. The billionaire who had spent 18 months fighting to reclaim his reputation and his life had returned to find that there was no life left to reclaim. But Marcus Chun had not become successful by giving up when faced with devastating setbacks. He had built his fortune by adapting to changing circumstances and finding new opportunities where others saw only problems. This would be no different. His marriage might be over, but his life was far from finished. The real question was what he would choose to build from the ashes of what he had lost.